A 9-year-old boy suffering from heatstroke brought his dehydrated 3-year-old sister to a gas station after being locked in a car for hours. When the attendant gave them water and asked where their parents were, the boy's answer about their new stepfathers, teaching them a lesson, made him lock the doors and call 911. The heat shimmered above the asphalt like a living thing, distorting the horizon and turning the world into a wavering mirage. Riverside, California was suffering through the most brutal July heat wave in 15 years, the mercury climbing past 103 degrees by mid-afternoon. In this suffocating furnace, 9-year-old Thaddeus Mercer staggered forward, his sister's weight becoming impossible to bear. "Just a little farther, Ren," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if his 3-year-old sister could hear him anymore. Her head lolled against his shoulder, damp curls plastered to her feverish forehead. Her breathing came in short, rapid bursts, her normally rosy cheeks now an alarming shade of crimson. Thad's own vision blurred as sweat dripped into his eyes. His mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton, his tongue thick and useless. But he couldn't stop. Stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant he refused to complete the thought. The deserted stretch of suburban highway seemed to extend forever, heat waves dancing across the pavement. No cars had passed in what felt like hours. Behind them, the upscale development of Hillcrest Estates had receded into the distance, its manicured lawns and Spanish-style homes incongruous with his current desperation. "Water soon," he promised Ren, shifting her weight to his other hip. Though small for her age, she felt impossibly heavy now. His arms trembled with the effort, but he tightened his grip. "Be brave, Rennie, like the bird you're named for." His sister's only response was a faint whimper. Thad's mind, despite his own dehydration, remained methodical. He'd always been what his kindergarten teacher called an old soul, observant, cautious, with a gravity that seemed to belong to someone much older. Now, that premature responsibility was the only thing keeping them moving forward. The morning replayed in his mind as he walked, each step a monumental effort in the crushing heat. "Garrison, it was an accident." His mother's voice, tight with that familiar nervous edge that had become more pronounced over the past 4 months. "She's only 3. Thad had been building a Lego spaceship in the corner of the living room, trying to make himself invisible as he always did when that particular tone entered his mother's voice. Ren had been coloring quietly at the coffee table until moments before, when she'd accidentally knocked over her cup of apple juice. The liquid had splashed across the glass surface and onto the display case below, the one containing Garrison's prize-signed baseball cards. 3 is old enough to know better. Garrison Reed didn't raise his voice. That was what made it worse somehow. His anger came in a low, controlled simmer rather than explosive bursts. "You coddle them, Vivian. That's the problem." Thad watched through lowered lashes as his stepfather of 4 months bent to examine the damage. Garrison was tall with broad shoulders and the kind of good looks that Thad's mother's friends had gushed about at the wedding. "Such a catch," they'd whispered, as if Vivian had been drowning. Maybe she had been, in a way. After Dad left 2 years ago, disappearing with a dental hygienist half his age and most of their savings, Vivian had worked double and sometimes triple shifts at Riverside Memorial. She'd come home with dark half-moons under her eyes, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled and sometimes spotted with substances Thad pretended not to notice. The apartment they downsized to had been cramped and dingy, but it was home. Then Garrison appeared, charming, financially secure, and seemingly besotted with Vivian. A pharmaceutical sales representative with a house in Hillcrest Estates, he'd swept into their lives like a solution to everything. The wedding had been small and hasty. Thad had been the ring bearer, uncomfortable in stiff new clothes. Ren had been the flower girl, though she'd eaten most of the petals instead of scattering them. "I'm sorry." Ren's voice was tiny as she huddled against the couch, her coloring book forgotten. "I'm sorry, Garrison." Thad tensed at the fear in his sister's voice. Ren had called Garrison Daddy for exactly 2 weeks after the wedding. Then, for reasons she couldn't or wouldn't explain, she'd stopped. "Sorry doesn't fix irreplaceable collectibles, does it?" Garrison carefully lifted a baseball card from the puddle of juice, his face tightening as he examined it. This Maguire rookie card was worth over $5,000. Thad saw his mother flinch at the amount. Money had become a weapon in their household, not wielded violently, but with precise surgical strikes. Garrison never failed to mention costs, values, his contributions. The unspoken counterpoint was always Vivian's financial dependence, the debt of gratitude she and her children supposedly owed. "I'll replace it," his mother said automatically, though they all knew her nursing assistant's salary wouldn't cover such an expense. "With what?" Garrison's smile held no warmth. "Your hidden fortune?" It was then that the hospital had called. An emergency, several staff out with summer flu. Could she come in? Vivian had looked at Garrison with naked pleading in her eyes. "Go," he'd said with a magnanimous wave. "I'll take care of the kids." Those words, which should have been reassuring, sent a chill through Thad. A neon sign appeared in the distance, wavering in the heat like an oasis that might disappear at any moment. Thad squinted, trying to bring it into focus. The Shell logo gradually materialized, and with it, renewed determination surged through his depleted body. "Almost there, Ren," he gasped, his voice a rasp. "Gas station. Water." His sister's only response was the alarming heat radiating from her small body. Thad's thoughts returned to the morning's events, the decision that had led them here. After Vivian left for her emergency shift, Garrison had been eerily calm. "Get in the car, kids. We're going for a drive." Thad had immediately been suspicious. Garrison never took them anywhere fun. No parks, no children's museums, no playgrounds. The most they got were silent car rides to and from necessary appointments, or to Vivian's workplace when arrangements fell through. "Where are we going?" Thad had asked, already positioning himself between Garrison and Ren. "Does it matter?" I said, "Get in the car." The cold, flat tone brooked no argument. They'd climbed into the back of Garrison's black sedan, its leather interior already hot from sitting in the driveway. Thad had buckled Ren into her booster seat, then himself. They'd driven in silence for approximately 15 minutes, ending up at the Dugout, a sports bar near the edge of town. "I'm meeting some friends," Garrison had announced, pulling into a parking spot at the far end of the lot, away from the building's entrance. He'd turned off the engine but left the keys in the ignition, turning to face them with an expression that made Thad's stomach knot. "You two are going to wait here, in the car?" Thad had asked, alarm rising. Even at 9, he knew about the dangers of hot cars. His teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, had just given them a summer safety lecture before school let out. "Yes, in the car." Garrison's smile hadn't reached his eyes. "I think you both need some quiet time to think about respect and responsibility, about not destroying other people's property." "But it's too hot," Thad had protested, panic building. "We can't. You'll be fine. I'm leaving the windows cracked." Garrison had demonstrated by lowering each window approximately 1 inch. 2 hours should be enough time for the lesson to sink in. 2 hours. Thad's voice had cracked. "We'll get sick." Ren should have been more careful. Garrison had cut him off. "Actions have consequences, Thaddeus. It's time you both learned that. Your mother spoils you. She never follows through with discipline. Take us home," Thad had pleaded, hearing the desperation in his own voice and hating it. "Please, we'll be good. This isn't a negotiation." Garrison had checked his watch. "I'll be back at 2:30, not a minute before. If I hear you've been causing a scene or trying to get out, the consequences will be worse." "Understood." Ren had begun to cry softly. Thad had nodded numbly, mind already calculating, planning, assessing options. "Good boy." The mocking praise had stung worse than a slap. 2 hours. Think about what you've done. With that, Garrison had locked the doors and strode toward the sports bar without a backward glance. At first, Thad had tried to make it bearable. He'd entertained Ren with stories, played I Spy, counted passing cars. But as the minutes ticked by, the temperature inside the sedan had risen to unbearable levels. Their clothes had grown soaked with sweat. Ren's crying had subsided into an eerie lethargy that frightened Thad far more than her tears. After what he estimated was an hour, He knew they couldn't wait any longer. The car had become an oven. He remembered reading somewhere that temperatures inside a vehicle could be 20 or 30 degrees hotter than outside. If it was over 100 degrees in the shade. His decision came when Ren stopped responding to her name. The emergency glass hammer in Garrison's glove compartment had been meant for water accidents, to break a window if the car ever became submerged. Thad supposed this was a different kind of drowning. He'd smashed the rear passenger window, carefully cleared the glass from Ren's booster seat, and extracted her from the sweltering death trap. He knew Garrison would be furious about the window. He knew the consequences would be severe. But he calculated that Garrison's rage would be less dangerous than staying in the car. At least they'd be alive to face his punishment. The gas station loomed closer now, no longer a mirage but solid reality. Thad stumbled the last 100 yards, his vision tunneling until all he could see was the glass entrance door. His legs moved mechanically, autonomously, fueled by the last dregs of adrenaline and desperate determination. The rush of air conditioning hit him like a physical force as he shouldered his way inside. The cool air against his sweat-soaked skin sent a violent shiver through his body. For a moment, he stood disoriented in the artificial chill, blinking against the fluorescent lighting. "Hey kid, you okay?" A voice penetrated his fog. A man appeared before him, middle-aged with salt and pepper hair and concerned brown eyes. His name tag read Waqen. Thad opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, his legs finally gave out, and he collapsed to his knees on the linoleum floor, still clutching Ren protectively against his chest. "Dios mío," the man breathed, crouching down immediately. What happened? His hands moved quickly, professionally, checking Ren's pulse at her neck, then placing a palm against her forehead. "She's burning up. Water," Thad managed to croak. "Please, water." Waqen didn't hesitate. He rushed to the refrigerated section, returning seconds later with 2 bottles of water. He twisted the cap off one and helped Thad hold it to Ren's parched lips. "Small sips," he instructed gently. "Not too fast." Thad nodded, his own thirst overwhelming but secondary to his sister's needs. Ren stirred slightly at the touch of water, her cracked lips parting, a soft moan escaping. "That's it, little one," Waqen encouraged. "Drink a little." He opened the second bottle and handed it to Thad. "You too, boy." Slowly. The water was the most exquisite thing Thad had ever tasted. It took every ounce of his self-control not to gulp it down. He sipped obediently, feeling the liquid revive him almost instantly. "Where are your parents?" Waqen asked, his tone gentle but concerned. "How did you get here?" Thad lowered the bottle, meeting the man's eyes directly. Something in Waqen's expression, genuine concern without judgment, loosened the tight control Thad had maintained through their ordeal. "Our new stepdad said we needed to learn a lesson about respect," he answered, his voice steadier now though still raspy. "He left us in the car while he went to meet his friends at the dugout. He said 2 hours would teach us to stop crying when he yells at Mom." Waqen's expression transformed, compassion giving way to something harder, more resolute. Without a word, he stood and strode to the front door. Thad watched as the man flipped the sign from open to closed and turned the deadbolt. "How long were you in that car?" Waqen asked, returning to kneel beside them. "About an hour, I think," Thad answered. "Ren stopped answering me. I broke the window to get us out." Waqen nodded approvingly. "You did the right thing, kid. You probably saved your sister's life." He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. "I'm calling 911. You both need medical attention." Thad felt a sudden spike of panic. "He'll be mad about the window." Understanding dawned in Waqen's eyes. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you or your sister. That's a promise." Something in the man's tone, absolute certainty without a hint of doubt, allowed Thad to believe him at least provisionally. He watched as Waqen dialed, reporting their situation with calm efficiency. Medical terms like dehydration and heat exhaustion filtered through Thad's consciousness. As they waited for the ambulance, Waqen continued to help them drink water, wrapping them in cool, damp towels from the employee break room. The man's movements were practiced, assured. "You seem to know what you're doing," Thad observed, cradling Ren against him. His sister had regained some awareness, though her eyes remained glassy and unfocused. "I worked as an EMT before buying this place," Waqen explained, "and I have 3 kids of my own." He hesitated, then added, "I also know what it's like to be afraid at home." Thad's gaze snapped to Waqen's face. The man met his look directly, without embarrassment or pity. "My father had a temper," Waqen continued quietly, "and fists to match it. I was your age when my mother finally took us and left." Thad absorbed this information silently. The admission created an unexpected bridge between them, an understanding that required no further explanation. "What's your name, brave one?" Waqen asked. "Thaddeus Mercer. Everyone calls me Thad." He looked down at his sister. "This is Ren. She's 3. You're a good brother, Thad." Waqen's voice held simple conviction. "What you did today was very brave." The praise, so different from Garrison's mocking tone, embarrassed Thad. He shrugged uncomfortably. "I just did what I had to do." "That's what courage is," Waqen replied. "Doing what needs to be done, even when you're scared." Distant sirens penetrated the silence that followed. Thad instinctively tightened his hold on Ren, uncertainty flooding back. "What's going to happen now?" he asked, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. Waqen placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "The paramedics will take you to the hospital to make sure you're both okay. The police will come too. They'll need to talk to you about what happened." "Will they call our mom?" "Yes, they'll contact your mother." Thad hesitated, then voiced his deepest fear. "What if we have to go back home? With him?" Waqen's expression hardened. "That's not going to happen. Not today, not ever. I promise you that." As the sirens grew louder, Thad realized he believed the man. For the first time in 4 months, since Garrison had entered their lives with his perfect smile and cold eyes, Thad allowed himself to feel a cautious spark of hope. The ambulance pulled into the gas station parking lot, its lights painting the interior of the store in alternating flashes of red and white. As the paramedics rushed in, Thad surrendered to their care, his body finally acknowledging the toll of the day. His last conscious thought before exhaustion claimed him was a silent plea that his mother would be waiting when he woke. Behind his closed eyelids, he could still see Garrison's face, hear his voice promising consequences. But for now, at least they were beyond his reach. For the first time since he could remember, Thad let someone else be the protector. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Memorial Hospital buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Thad blinked slowly, consciousness returning in gradual layers. The antiseptic smell burned his nostrils, and the coolness of the room made him shiver despite the thin blanket covering his body. An IV-line snaked from his arm to a hanging bag of clear fluid. "Thaddeus? Can you hear me, honey?" His mother's voice, strained and thick with emotion, drew his attention to the side of the bed. Vivian Mercer sat in a vinyl chair, her scrubs replaced by jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt that looked hastily thrown on. Her auburn hair, normally pulled back in a neat ponytail during her shifts, hung loose around her face, which was pale and drawn with exhaustion and worry. Dark smudges beneath her bloodshot eyes suggested she'd been crying. "Mom," Thad croaked, his throat still raw. "Ren, she's okay," Vivian said quickly, reaching for his hand. Her fingers were cool against his skin. "She's in pediatric intensive care, but the doctors say she'll recover. Her dehydration was more severe than yours." Her voice cracked slightly. "She might have died if you hadn't." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Thad felt her hand tighten around his. "What happened, Thaddeus?" she whispered. "The police said Garrison left you both in a car? At a bar." Disbelief colored her words, as if she still couldn't reconcile this information with the man she'd married. Thad nodded slowly, watching his mother's face. He'd become expert at reading her expressions over the past years. especially after Dad left. He recognized the conflicting emotions battling behind her eyes. Horror at what had happened to her children, guilt for not being there, and beneath it all, the terrible fear of someone whose world was collapsing yet again. Ren spilled juice on his baseball cards, Thad explained, his voice still raspy. A nurse had left a plastic cup of water on the bedside table, and he reached for it gratefully. The Maguire rookie. Vivian flinched at the memory. I know about that part. I was there before I got called in. But why would he? She shook her head, struggling to comprehend. He told me his mother was coming over to watch you both. That's what he texted me. This new information didn't surprise Thad. He'd never met Garrison's mother, though Garrison mentioned her occasionally, always as a threat. If you think I'm strict, you should meet my mother, he'd say with that cold smile. The woman existed in their household as a shadowy disciplinarian, invoked but never seen. He said we needed to learn about consequences, Thad said carefully. He drove us to the dugout and told us we had to stay in the car for 2 hours while he met some friends. He cracked the windows a little. The memory of the suffocating heat made his breathing quicken. Ren got really sick. She stopped answering when I called her name. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. Oh God, she whispered. There was an emergency hammer in the glove box, Thad continued, feeling it important that his mother understand he hadn't acted rashly. I tried to wait, but Ren was so hot. Her skin felt like it was burning. So I broke the window and got us out. I knew he'd be mad about the window, but... Mad about the window, Vivian interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp. Thaddeus, he should be on his knees thanking God you were smart enough to get yourselves out. You could have died in there. Both of you. Something in her fierce tone gave Thad courage. He's done things before, Mom, he said quietly. Not like this, but other things. Vivian went very still, her face draining of what little color it had left. What things? Before Thad could answer, the door to the hospital room swung open. A woman entered, her movements brisk but not hurried. She was somewhere in her 40s, with warm brown skin, black hair pulled back in a neat bun, and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore a charcoal pantsuit and sensible shoes, a badge clipped to her belt. Mrs. Reed? The woman asked, glancing between Vivian and Thad. Mercer, Vivian corrected automatically. I kept my name, Vivian Mercer. The woman nodded, making a small notation in the notebook she carried. I'm Detective Elena Cortez with Riverside PD, assigned to Child Protective Services Liaison. I need to ask your son some questions, if he's feeling up to it. Her gaze shifted to Thad, gentling slightly. Hello, Thaddeus. The doctors tell me you're doing much better. Thad nodded, instinctively shrinking back against his pillows. He'd never spoken to a police officer before. The detective must have noticed his apprehension because she smiled, the expression warming her serious face. You're not in any trouble, she assured him. In fact, from what I've heard, you're quite the hero. I just need to understand exactly what happened today. Vivian stood, still clutching Thad's hand. I should be present for this. Detective Cortez shook her head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer, but I need to speak with Thaddeus alone first. Standard procedure in these cases. Her tone was firm but not unkind. There's a family consultation room down the hall where you can wait. The doctor would like to update you on your daughter's condition as well. Vivian hesitated, clearly torn. Thad, are you okay with this? I don't have to go if you don't want me to. The concern in her voice touched him, but Thad nodded. It's okay, Mom. I'll tell her what happened. After Vivian reluctantly left, Detective Cortez took the now vacant chair beside the bed. She didn't immediately start questioning him. Instead, she set her notebook aside and leaned forward slightly. That was quite a walk you took in this heat, she said conversationally. The gas station where Mr. Ramirez helped you is almost 2 miles from the dugout. The paramedic said you were suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration, yet you managed to carry your sister all that way. Thad shrugged, uncomfortable with what sounded like praise. I had to. There wasn't anyone else. Detective Cortez nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age. Do you often feel responsible for taking care of your sister? The question caught Thad off guard. He'd never really thought about it as a choice. She's little, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Then, after a moment's reflection, he added, Mom works a lot. Even before Garrison. Someone has to watch out for Ren. I understand. There was no judgment in Detective Cortez's voice, only careful attention. Can you tell me about today? Start from the beginning. Thad recounted the morning's events, beginning with Ren's spilled juice and ending with their collapse at the gas station. The detective listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her face betraying nothing of her thoughts. Has anything like this happened before? She asked when he'd finished. Thad hesitated. Not exactly like this, but similar things? Detective Cortez prompted gently. Thad dropped his gaze to his hands, which were picking at a loose thread on the hospital blanket. Garrison doesn't like noise, or mess, or questions. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. When Mom's at work, he has different rules. What kind of rules? If we're too loud, we have to sit in the laundry room with the door closed. Sometimes for hours. Thad swallowed, memories surfacing. Once, Ren had an accident because she couldn't get to the bathroom in time. He made her sit in it until Mom got home. His voice dropped to a whisper. He told her if she mentioned it to Mom, he'd put her in there for a whole day next time. Detective Cortez's pen stilled. Did you tell your mother about this? Thad shook his head. Garrison said if we told, he'd convince Mom we were lying. That she'd have to choose between us and him. That we'd end up back in the old apartment with Mom working all the time and being sad again. I see. The detective's voice remained steady, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. Has he ever hit you or your sister, Thaddeus? No. This, at least, was the truth. He doesn't touch us. He says only trash has to use their hands to make a point. Thad repeated the words he'd heard Garrison say more than once. He says there are smarter ways to teach lessons. Detective Cortez was silent for a moment, writing something in her notebook. When she looked up, her expression was careful, controlled. What about your mother? Does Garrison treat her differently when you're alone versus when other people are around? The question made Thad uncomfortable, but he answered honestly. Sometimes. He doesn't yell at her like my dad used to, but he says things. He trailed off, struggling to articulate what he'd observed. He makes her feel bad. About not having money. About being tired all the time. About us. The detective nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. Thaddeus, have you ever noticed any changes in your mother since she married Garrison? In how she acts with friends or family? Thad thought about this. She doesn't talk to Aunt Lydia anymore. That's her best friend since college. Garrison said Aunt Lydia was a negative influence because she's divorced. And Mom doesn't go to her nursing friends' nights out anymore. Garrison says they waste money on frivolous things. Something flashed in Detective Cortez's eyes, recognition perhaps. Does your mother seem happy, Thaddeus? The question pierced him. He'd asked himself the same thing many times over the past months, watching his mother's smile grow increasingly brittle, her laugh less frequent. She was at first, he said softly, when they got engaged. She kept saying how lucky we were, how things would be better now. He looked up at the detective. But I don't think she's happy anymore. She just seems careful. All the time. Detective Cortez leaned back in her chair, her expression softening. You're very observant, Thaddeus. That's a valuable quality. She paused, then asked, Is there anything else you think I should know? Anything that worries you about going home? The unasked question hung between them. Would he feel safe returning to Garrison's house? Thad didn't have to consider his answer. I don't want Ren to go back there, he said firmly. Or Mom. He won't hit us. But he'll find ways to punish us for this. Especially now that people know. The detective nodded, her face grave. I understand. She made another note, then set her notebook aside. Thank you for being so honest with me, Thaddeus. That took a lot of courage. Before Thad could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside his room. Raised voices, one distinctly familiar. His heart rate spiked, the machine beside his bed beeping in response. Where are my children? I have every right to see them. Garrison's voice carried through the closed door, the tone forceful but controlled. Even now, he was careful not to appear unreasonable to outsiders. Detective Cortez stood, her posture straightening. Stay here, she instructed Thad, her hand briefly touching his shoulder in reassurance. Everything's going to be okay. She stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind her. Through the narrow window in the door, Thad could see figures moving. Detective Cortez's straight back, a uniformed officer, and Garrison, looking immaculate in a button-down shirt and pressed slacks. His handsome face arranged in an expression of concerned indignation. Thad couldn't make out the words, but the tone of the conversation was clear. Garrison was objecting to something, his gestures becoming increasingly animated though still carefully restrained. Detective Cortez remained unmoved, her stance protective as she stood between Garrison and the door to Thad's room. The confrontation ended with Garrison turning abruptly and striding away down the corridor. The detective watched him go, then spoke briefly to the uniformed officer before re-entering Thad's room. Was that Garrison? Thad asked, though he already knew the answer. Detective Cortez nodded. Yes, he wanted to see you, but I've explained that's not possible right now. She didn't elaborate on the legal reasons, for which Thad was grateful. There will be an officer stationed in the hallway for the remainder of your stay, just as a precaution. The knowledge that Garrison was in the hospital sent a chill through Thad. Does he know about Ren? Is he trying to see her too? Your sister is safe, Detective Cortez assured him. She has her own protective detail, and the pediatric ICU has additional security protocols. She sat down again, her expression serious. Thaddeus, there are going to be some changes over the next few days. We need to make sure both you and your sister are safe while we sort everything out. What kind of changes? Thad asked warily. For now, once you're discharged, you and Ren will be staying with a foster family. It's temporary, she added quickly, seeing his expression. Just until we can ensure your home environment is safe. What about Mom? The thought of being separated from his mother sent a fresh wave of panic through him. Your mother will be involved every step of the way, the detective promised. But right now, our priority is your safety and your sister's safety. Thad absorbed this information silently. The idea of going to a stranger's home was frightening, but not as frightening as the alternative. Will we stay together? Me and Ren? Absolutely, Detective Cortez nodded firmly. We don't separate siblings unless there's no other option. And in this case, I think it would be particularly harmful to separate you two, given how protective you are of her. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A moment later, Vivian entered, her face even paler than before. I just saw Garrison in the hallway, she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. He said there's been a misunderstanding, that he only left the children for a few minutes while he used the restroom inside the dugout. Her eyes sought Thad's, confusion and distress evident. He said he came back to find the window broken and you both gone, that he's been searching everywhere for you. Detective Cortez's expression remained neutral, but her tone was pointed. And what time did he say this happened, Mrs. Mercer? Around noon, Vivian replied, uncertainty creeping into her voice. He said he only stepped away for 5 minutes at most. That's interesting, the detective said mildly, because according to the medical examiner's preliminary report, based on your children's core temperatures and the estimated time of their arrival at the gas station, they were exposed to extreme heat for significantly longer than 5 minutes. She paused, letting the information sink in. Additionally, Mr. Ramirez at the Shell station has provided a statement and security footage showing your children arriving at his establishment at approximately 1:15 in the afternoon. Given the distance from the dugout and their condition, they must have left the car around 12:30. Vivian sank into a chair, her legs seemingly unable to support her. That's over 2 hours after I left for work. He told me his mother was coming to watch them. Her voice had dropped to a whisper. He lied. Yes, Detective Cortez said simply. It appears he did. A heavy silence filled the room. Thad watched his mother, recognizing the moment when disbelief gave way to devastating certainty. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth. What have I done? She whispered, the words muffled behind her fingers. Dear God, what have I done? Before either Thad or the detective could respond, there was another knock at the door. A nurse entered carrying a clipboard. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, glancing between the adults. But there's someone here who was asking about the children. A Mr. Ramirez? He said he was the one who helped them at the gas station. Thad sat up straighter, a rush of relief washing over him at the mention of Waqen's name. Can I see him? The nurse looked to Detective Cortez, who nodded her assent. That would be fine. Please send him in. Moments later, Waqen entered the room. He had changed out of his gas station uniform into jeans and a button-down shirt, but Thad recognized him immediately. The man carried a small gift bag in one hand and what looked like a laptop case in the other. Hey, kid, Waqen said, a warm smile breaking across his face when he saw Thad alert and sitting up. You're looking a whole lot better than the last time I saw you. Despite everything, Thad found himself smiling back. Hi, Mr. Ramirez. Waqen, please. He set the gift bag on the bedside table. Just a few things. Books, some drawing supplies. Hospital time gets boring. Thank you, Thad said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. Waqen turned to Vivian, extending his hand. You must be the children's mother. Waqen Ramirez. Vivian stood, grasping his hand in both of hers. Thank you, she said fervently, for helping my children, for calling the ambulance, for everything. Anyone would have done the same, Waqen replied, though they all knew that wasn't necessarily true. Actually, Detective Cortez interjected. Mr. Ramirez went above and beyond. After the ambulance left with the children, he reviewed his security camera footage to preserve it for evidence. He also contacted the dugout to see if they had external cameras that might have captured the incident. Waqen shifted, looking slightly uncomfortable with the praise. Unfortunately, the dugout doesn't have cameras in their parking lot. But, he hesitated, then lifted the laptop case he was carrying. I thought this might be important. After the police came to take my statement, I was concerned this might not be an isolated incident. So I went back to the dugout parking lot and set up my own camera. I have a wildlife cam I use when we go camping. I positioned it with a view of where the car had been parked. Detective Cortez raised an eyebrow, professionally interested. And about 40 minutes after the ambulance left with the kids, a man matching the description of their stepfather returned to the parking lot. Waqen unzipped the case, removing a laptop. He saw the broken window, looked around, and instead of calling for help or reporting missing children, he simply drove away. The room fell silent as the implications of this information sank in. Waqen set up his laptop on the rolling table beside Thad's bed. I have the footage here if you want to see it, he offered, directing the comment to Detective Cortez. The detective nodded, her expression grave. That would be extremely helpful, Mr. Ramirez. As Waqen pulled up the video file, Vivian moved to stand beside Thad's bed, her hand finding his shoulder. Her fingers dug in slightly, whether seeking support or offering it. Thad wasn't sure. Perhaps both. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show a black sedan parked at the far end of the lot, its rear passenger window shattered. A man approached, unquestionably Garrison, his posture straight, his movements deliberate. He circled the car once, examining the broken window, then glanced around the parking lot as if searching for witnesses. After a moment, he unlocked the car, slid into the driver's seat, and drove away. The timestamp confirms this was at 2:45, Waqen said quietly. More than an hour after the children arrived at my gas station. Vivian's grip on Thad's shoulder tightened painfully, then abruptly relaxed. When he looked up at her, he was startled by the transformation in her face. The confusion and uncertainty were gone, replaced by a cold, clear anger he'd never seen before. "Detective," she said, her voice steady and controlled, "I want a restraining order for myself and both my children. Today." Detective Cortez nodded. "I'll expedite the paperwork myself. Given this new evidence, I don't anticipate any difficulties in having it granted immediately." She turned to Waqen. "Mr. Ramirez, would you be willing to provide a copy of this footage for our investigation?" "Of course." Waqen reached into his pocket and produced a USB drive. "I already made a copy. I thought you might need it." The detective accepted the drive with a grateful nod. "This is extremely helpful. Your foresight may well have made a critical difference in this case." "I just did what needed doing," Waqen replied, echoing the words he'd spoken to Thad at the gas station. He glanced at Thad, a silent understanding passing between them. As the adults continued discussing legal proceedings and next steps, Thad leaned back against his pillows, a strange mixture of emotions washing over him. Fear still lurked at the edges of his consciousness. Fear of Garrison. Fear of the unknown future that awaited them. But alongside it was something else, something that felt remarkably like relief. For months, he had carried the weight of what was happening in their home alone, shielding Ren as best he could, never certain if what he was experiencing was bad enough to warrant outside intervention. Now the secret was out. Adult allies, Detective Cortez, Waqen, and perhaps most importantly, his mother were taking action, wielding their authority and resources in ways he, as a child, never could. For the first time since Garrison had entered their lives, Thad allowed himself to believe that escape might be possible. Not just from a locked car, but from the subtle, insidious fear that had invaded every corner of their home. The road ahead would not be easy. He understood enough about the world to know that. But looking at his mother's newly resolute expression, at Detective Cortez's quiet competence, at Waqen's steady presence, he felt something tentatively unfurl within his chest. Hope, fragile but undeniable. As if reading his thoughts, Vivian looked down at him, her eyes bright with tears but also with determination. She leaned down to press a kiss to his forehead. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered against his skin. "I should have seen. I should have known." "It's okay, Mom," Thad replied automatically, the words he'd used countless times to reassure her when she was overwhelmed with work or worry. But this time, Vivian shook her head. "No, it's not okay, but it will be." Her voice strengthened, a promise in the words. "I'm going to make sure of it." As the afternoon light slanted through the hospital blinds, casting striped shadows across the room, Thad found himself believing her. They had a long way to go, but they had taken the first step. They had escaped. 3 weeks passed like a strange dream. Thad lay on his borrowed bed in the Garcia family's guest room, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars formed constellations he was still learning to identify. Miguel Garcia, a high school astronomy teacher, had helped him arrange them accurately on their third night in the house. "So you can always find your way," Miguel had explained with gentle understanding, as if he somehow knew how lost Thad felt. The Garcia home wasn't large, a modest 3-bedroom ranch house in a middle-class neighborhood, but it was warm in ways that had nothing to do with the summer heat still gripping Riverside. Rosa Garcia, a pediatric nurse at Riverside Memorial, moved through their lives with quiet efficiency, her calm presence a stabilizing force for both Thad and Ren. Their teenage daughter Lucia, 16 and initially standoffish, had gradually warmed to the siblings, especially to Ren, who followed the older girl around with undisguised admiration. A soft knock drew Thad's attention to the doorway where Rosa stood, her scrubs exchanged for jeans and a faded University of California t-shirt. "Are you ready, Thaddeus?" she asked. "Your mother will be here in 20 minutes. Thad nodded, swinging his legs off the bed. Today was their third supervised visit since being placed in emergency foster care. The previous 2 had been held at the Child Welfare Services office, sterile, uncomfortable meetings in rooms with 2-way mirrors and too bright fluorescent lighting. This time, they would meet at Fairmount Park, a neutral location that Detective Cortez had suggested might feel less institutional. "Is Ren up from her nap?" he asked, reaching for the shoes Rosa had bought him their second day here, after realizing his old ones were falling apart. Lucia is helping her get dressed. That little one has opinions about her outfits now. Rosa's smile was fond. She wants to look pretty for your mother. Thad felt a familiar pang of gratitude mixed with uncertainty. The Garcias had been unfailingly kind, treating him and Ren not as burdens or obligations, but as children deserving of care and respect. Sometimes, especially at night when the house was quiet, he wondered what would happen when this temporary arrangement ended. Would they go home with Mom? Would home be somewhere new? And what about Garrison? These thoughts must have shown on his face because Rosa moved into the room, sitting beside him on the bed. "One day at a time, Polito," she said softly, using the affectionate nickname, Little Chicken, she'd given him after noticing how carefully he watched over Ren. "Today you see your mama, you enjoy the sunshine, you eat ice cream from the park vendor. Tomorrow will take care of itself." It was what she always said when the uncertainty of the future threatened to overwhelm him. One day at a time. Thad wasn't sure he believed in this philosophy. His own experience had taught him that planning ahead was essential for survival, but he appreciated her attempt to ease his worry. "What if the judge decides we have to go back?" he asked, voicing the fear that had been growing as the custody hearing approached. "What if Garrison convinces everyone he's changed?" Rosa's expression grew serious. "The system doesn't always work perfectly, Thaddeus, but there are many people fighting for you and your sister. Detective Cortez, your advocate Mrs. Thompson, the doctors at the hospital. And your mother," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your mother is doing everything she can to make sure you are safe." This much was true. In the 3 weeks since the incident, Vivian had moved out of Garrison's house and into a small apartment, furnished with donated items from her co-workers at the hospital. She had filed for divorce, attended every court-mandated parenting class and therapy session, and secured a restraining order against Garrison. She was fighting harder than Thad had ever seen her fight for anything. Yet doubt lingered. He'd watched his mother bend under pressure before. He'd seen her make compromises for financial security, for what she thought was best for her children. What if Garrison found a way to manipulate her again? "Come," Rosa said, recognizing his spiraling thoughts. "Lucia made lemonade for the trip. And Miguel packed a frisbee so you can play in the park." Downstairs, the rest of the household was already assembled in the kitchen. Miguel, tall and lean with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, was filling a cooler with drinks and snacks. Lucia, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, sat at the kitchen table with Ren, who was proudly showing off her mismatched outfit, purple leggings, a yellow sundress worn over them, and light-up sneakers. "Thad!" Ren's face lit up when she saw her brother. "Look, I dressed myself. Very stylish," he approved, managing a genuine smile at her enthusiasm. The change in his sister over the past 3 weeks had been remarkable. When they first arrived at the Garcia home, Ren had been nearly mute, speaking only to Thad in whispers, startling at sudden movements or loud noises. Now, though still shy with strangers, she laughed and chattered freely within the safety of the foster home. "Mommy's coming," she informed him seriously. "We're going to the park. With the ducks." "That's right, Mija," Miguel confirmed, closing the cooler. "And if it's okay with your brother and Rosa, maybe we'll bring some bread to feed them." Ren looked to Thad for approval, a habit she hadn't broken despite the safe environment. He nodded, and she broke into a gap-toothed grin. "Ready to go, troops?" Rosa asked, glancing at her watch. "We should head out now to be there when your mother arrives." The drive to Fairmount Park took 15 minutes, during which Ren alternated between excited chatter and periods of unusual silence, her small face pressed against the window. Thad recognized the signs of her nervous anticipation. Despite everything, she missed their mother desperately. The park was busy with weekend visitors, families picnicking on the grass, teenagers lounging by the lake, elderly couples strolling along the paved paths. Rosa found a spot beneath a sprawling oak tree, spreading a blanket for them to sit on while Miguel set up folding chairs. Lucia immediately took Ren to see the ducks, leaving Thad with the adults. "You okay, bud?" Miguel asked, noticing Thad's tension as he scanned the parking lot for his mother's car. "Yeah," Thad replied automatically, then amended, "No, I don't know." He glanced toward the playground where Ren was now pointing excitedly at a family of ducks. "Ren's doing so well now. She's almost back to how she was before. Before everything. What if seeing Mom sets her back?" Miguel considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. Thad appreciated that about him, the way he treated even a 9-year-old's concerns with serious consideration. "Change is hard," Miguel acknowledged. "But your sister is stronger than you might think. So are you." He rested a hand lightly on Thad's shoulder. "And remember, this isn't your responsibility alone anymore. That's what all these visits and hearings are for, to make sure the grown-ups are doing their job of protecting you both." Thad wanted to believe him. Part of him did. But years of being the de facto protector for both Ren and his mother had ingrained habits that were hard to break. "There she is," Rosa said quietly, nodding toward the parking lot. Thad turned to see his mother walking toward them, a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. She looked different. Thinner perhaps, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was something else too. A straightness to her posture that hadn't been there before. A determination in her stride. "Thaddeus," she called, quickening her pace as she spotted him. "Hi, sweetheart." As always happened when he saw her, conflicting emotions surged through Thad: love, relief, lingering hurt, and a complicated mix of protectiveness and resentment. She was his mother. He loved her fiercely. But a part of him couldn't forget how long it had taken her to see what was happening under her own roof. "Hi, Mom," he said, stepping forward to meet her. Vivian enfolded him in a tight hug, pressing her face against the top of his head for a moment longer than usual. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You look good," she said, her gaze sweeping over him appraisingly. "Healthy. Are you sleeping okay? Eating enough?" Before Thad could respond, a high-pitched shriek of delight interrupted them. Ren was racing across the grass, Lucia following at a more sedate pace. "Mommy!" Ren launched herself at Vivian, who crouched down to catch her, nearly toppling backward with the force of the impact. "My baby," Vivian murmured, gathering Ren close, her eyes closing briefly as she inhaled the scent of her daughter's hair. "Oh, I've missed you so much." Ren pulled back, patting her mother's cheeks with small hands. "We saw ducks, Mommy. Big ducks and baby ducks. Can we feed them?" Mr. Miguel brought bread. "Of course we can," Vivian assured her, visibly relieved at Ren's enthusiastic greeting. She glanced up at Rosa and Miguel, who had moved a short distance away to give the family some privacy while still fulfilling their supervisory role. "Thank you for bringing them. And for..." She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything they'd done for her children. "You're welcome," Rosa replied simply. "We'll be over here if you need anything. Take your time." For the next hour, they settled into a semblance of normalcy. Vivian produced sidewalk chalk, bubbles, and small stuffed animals from her tote bag, gifts that made Ren squeal with delight. They fed the ducks, played a gentle game of frisbee, and eventually settled on the blanket for the snacks Miguel had packed. Through it all, Thad observed his mother closely. Something had shifted in her, a fragility replaced by a quiet resolve. She laughed more freely with Ren than she had in months, her attention wholly focused on her children rather than anxiously divided as it had so often been in Garrison's presence. When Ren wandered off with Lucia to use the park restroom, Vivian turned to Thad, her expression growing serious. "How are you really doing?" she asked softly. "And please don't say fine just to make me feel better." Thad considered deflecting but found he didn't want to. "It's weird," he admitted. "The Garcias are nice. Really nice. Rosa doesn't make Ren eat vegetables she hates. Miguel helps me with math. Lucia taught me to make friendship bracelets." He twisted the colorful band around his wrist. "But it's not home." Vivian nodded. Her eyes filling with tears, she quickly blinked away. I'm working on that, sweetheart. The apartment isn't much, just 2 bedrooms, and the kitchen is tiny, but I've set up your room with your old things. The ones I could get, anyway. A shadow crossed her face. Garrison wouldn't let me take everything. But Barbara from work gave me a bunk bed her kids outgrew, and I found your space posters in the garage. The mention of Garrison made Thad tense. Have you seen him? No. Vivian's response was immediate and firm. The restraining order prevents that. His lawyer contacts my lawyer if there's anything about the divorce or property division that needs to be discussed. She hesitated, then added, he's tried to send messages through mutual acquaintances. Apologies. Promises to change. The same things he said after. She trailed off, unwilling to revisit past incidents. Are you going back to him? Thad held his breath, dreading the answer even as he needed to hear it. Vivian's eyes widened in shock. God, no, Thaddeus. Never. She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. I will never put you or Ren in that situation again. Or myself. But what about money? Thad pressed, voicing the practical concern that had always been the leverage Garrison held over their family. The apartment, food, Ren's daycare. A look of deep regret and sorrow passed over Vivian's face. That should never have been your worry, she said softly. I'm so sorry that it was. That I let it become your burden too. She straightened her shoulders. I've been promoted at work to full nursing position instead of assistant. The pay is better and the schedule more regular. And... She hesitated, a hint of pride entering her voice. I've applied to a program for single mothers returning to school. To finish my RN degree. Thad tried to process this information. His mother hadn't mentioned pursuing her degree since before his father left. It had been a dream she'd set aside out of necessity, then out of habit, then seemingly forgotten altogether. Really? She nodded. It will take time. Evening classes, study sessions between shifts. But I can do it. There was a certainty in her voice that Thad hadn't heard in years. We'll be okay, Thaddeus. Not rich, not living in Hillcrest Estates, but okay. Together. He wanted to believe her. More than anything, he wanted to trust in this new, determined version of his mother. But experience had taught him to be cautious. The court date is next week, he said instead of voicing his doubts. Will I have to talk to the judge? Will Ren? You might, Vivian answered honestly. Your advocate, Mrs. Thompson, will be there to help if you do. But you just need to tell the truth, like you did with Detective Cortez. She squeezed his hand. I know that's scary, especially with Garrison there. The thought of facing his stepfather in court sent a cold wave of fear through Thad. What if he gets mad? What if he tries to hurt us after? He won't be able to, Vivian's voice hardened. The restraining order prohibits him from coming within 500 feet of any of us. And after the hearing, depending on the judge's ruling, there might be more permanent protective measures put in place. Before Thad could respond, Ren came racing back across the grass, Lucia following at a more sedate pace. Mommy! Thad! Lucia says there's an ice cream truck. Ren pointed excitedly toward the parking lot where, indeed, a white van decorated with colorful decals had pulled up. Can we get some? Please. Vivian glanced at Rosa, who nodded her approval from where she sat with Miguel. Of course, honey. Let's go see what they have. As they walked toward the ice cream truck, Ren skipping ahead with Lucia, Vivian kept her hand on Thad's shoulder. The weight of it was both comforting and strange. For so long, he had been the one offering support rather than receiving it. One day at a time, she said quietly, unconsciously echoing Rosa's earlier words. That's how we'll do this. One day at a time until it gets easier. Thad nodded, allowing himself to lean slightly into his mother's touch. Maybe she was right. Maybe that was all they could do. The courthouse loomed before them, an imposing structure of brick and stone that seemed designed to intimidate. Thad, dressed in his best clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt borrowed from the Garcia's nephew, clutched Ren's hand tightly as they climbed the steps. Rosa walked beside them, a steadying presence. Miguel had stayed home with Lucia, the court having determined that only the children's foster mother needed to attend. Inside, the air conditioning was a stark contrast to the summer heat outside. People in suits moved purposefully through the marble-floored hallway, their shoes clicking against the hard surface. A few glanced at their small group but quickly looked away, absorbed in their own legal concerns. "There's your mom," Rosa said, nodding toward a cluster of chairs where Vivian sat in conversation with a woman in a charcoal pantsuit whom Thad recognized as Detective Cortez. Beside them was another woman, younger, with a professional but friendly demeanor, Mrs. Thompson, the court-appointed advocate for the children. Vivian looked up as they approached, her face lighting with relief. She wore a simple navy blue dress that Thad had never seen before, her hair pulled back neatly. Despite her obvious attempt to appear composed, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the nervous way her hands clasped and unclasped in her lap. "There are my brave ones," she said, standing to embrace them both. "How are you feeling?" Before either child could answer, the courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff emerged. "Reed Mercer custody case. All parties please enter." Thad felt his stomach clench. Ren, sensing his anxiety, pressed closer to his side. "It's okay, Rennie," he whispered automatically. "Everything's going to be fine. Remember what we practiced," Mrs. Thompson said, crouching down to meet their eyes. "Just tell the truth. The judge is there to help make sure you're safe." They entered the courtroom in a small procession, Vivian and her attorney first, followed by Thad and Ren with Rosa and Mrs. Thompson, and finally Detective Cortez. The room was smaller than Thad had expected, with wooden benches, a raised platform where the judge would sit, and 2 tables facing it. And there, already seated at one of those tables, was Garrison. Thad faltered mid-step at the sight of his stepfather. Garrison looked impeccable as always in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly combed, his posture relaxed yet dignified. He turned slightly at their entrance, his gaze settling on Thad with an expression that, to outsiders, might appear concerned or even affectionate. But Thad recognized the cold calculation behind his eyes, the subtle message being conveyed. "Remember who I am. Remember what happens if you cross me." Ren, spotting Garrison, shrank against Thad's side, her small body trembling. "It's okay," Thad murmured, though his own heart was racing. "He can't hurt us here." They took their seats on the opposite side of the courtroom, as far from Garrison as possible. Mrs. Thompson positioned herself between the children and their stepfather, a human shield that Thad deeply appreciated. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Winters," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood as a woman in black robes entered from a side door. Judge Winters was older, perhaps in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and an expression of no-nonsense efficiency. She settled behind the bench, adjusted her glasses, and surveyed the courtroom. "Be seated," she instructed, then consulted the files before her. "We're here in the matter of custody for minor children Thaddeus and Ren Mercer. I've reviewed the case files, including the police reports, medical evaluations, and home study assessments." Her gaze lifted, settling briefly on each adult in the room. "This is not a criminal proceeding, though criminal charges may be pending separately. Our sole concern today is the welfare of these children." What followed was a blur of legal terminology and procedural exchanges. Attorneys spoke, witnesses were called. Detective Cortez testified about her investigation, her voice steady as she detailed the evidence of neglect and psychological abuse. The children's pediatrician, Dr. Chun, explained the medical implications of the incident, using terms like severe dehydration and heat stroke that made Vivian visibly flinch. Then it was Garrison's turn to speak. He rose with easy confidence, thanking the judge for the opportunity to clear up this tragic misunderstanding. His voice, smooth and reasonable, filled the courtroom. "Your Honor, I love my stepchildren as if they were my own," he began, his expression one of sincere regret. "What happened that day was a terrible error in judgment, one I will regret for the rest of my life." He went on to explain how he had only intended to run into the dugout for a moment to meet a pharmaceutical client, how he'd left the windows cracked for air, how he'd become distracted by an urgent work matter and lost track of time. There had been no intent to harm, he insisted, only a momentary lapse that had been drastically misinterpreted. Furthermore, he continued, I believe my wife's reaction to this unfortunate incident has been heavily influenced by her pre-existing depression and anxiety, conditions she struggled with since her first husband abandoned the family 2 years ago. A murmur ran through the courtroom at this calculated attack on Vivian's mental stability. Thad felt a surge of indignant anger. His mother's attorney rose to object, but Garrison had already planted the seed of doubt. My greatest wish, he concluded, his voice catching in what appeared to be genuine emotion, is for my family to be reunited, to rebuild the trust that has been damaged, and to move forward together. I've enrolled in parenting classes and anger management therapy, as the court recommended. I'm committed to being the husband and stepfather they deserve. As Garrison returned to his seat, his attorney looking pleased with the performance, Judge Winters's expression remained unreadable. She made a few notes, then looked up. We will now hear from the children's advocate, followed by testimony from the children themselves if they wish to speak. Her gaze settled on Thad and Ren. This is not mandatory, but the court would value their perspective if they feel comfortable sharing it. Mrs. Thompson presented a thorough assessment of the children's current state, Ren's progress in therapy, Thad's continued protectiveness toward his sister, their adjustment to the foster home, and their stated wishes regarding future living arrangements. Throughout, she emphasized the importance of stability and psychological safety for their continued recovery. When she finished, Judge Winters addressed the children directly, her tone gentler than it had been with the adults. Thaddeus, Ren, she said, would either of you like to tell me anything about what happened or what you want to happen next? You don't have to if you don't want to. Ren immediately shook her head, pressing closer to Thad's side. But Thad, after a moment's hesitation, raised his hand. I would like to speak, Your Honor, he said, his voice smaller than he would have liked but steady. Judge Winters nodded encouragingly. Please come forward, then. With a reassuring squeeze from Rosa and a whispered, You've got this, from his mother, Thad made his way to the witness stand. He was so small that even seated, he barely saw over its edge. A court officer brought him a cushion to sit on. After being sworn in, a process Thad found both intimidating and oddly comforting in its solemnity. He faced the judge directly, trying to forget that Garrison was watching from just a few feet away. Thaddeus, Judge Winters began, can you tell me in your own words what happened on the day you and your sister ended up at the hospital? Thad took a deep breath and began his account, focusing on the facts as Detective Cortez had advised him to do. He described the morning's events, Garrison's decision to leave them in the car, the deteriorating conditions inside the vehicle, and his ultimate decision to break the window when Ren became unresponsive. And was this the first time Mr. Reed had punished you or your sister in a way that frightened or hurt you? Judge Winters asked when he'd finished. Thad hesitated, aware of Garrison's eyes boring into him. Then he thought of Ren, of his mother, of the Garcias who had shown him what a safe home felt like. No, Your Honor, he said firmly. It wasn't the first time. With gentle prompting from the judge, Thad recounted other incidents. The prolonged isolations in the laundry room, the psychological tactics, the gradual separation of their mother from her support network. He spoke of the climate of fear that had pervaded their house, the careful way they had learned to navigate around Garrison's moods and rules. He said if we told Mom, she wouldn't believe us, Thad explained. He said she'd have to choose between us and him, and that without him, we'd be poor again and she'd be sad all the time. A ripple of reaction passed through the courtroom. From the corner of his eye, Thad could see his mother covering her mouth with her hand, tears streaming silently down her face. Thank you, Thaddeus, Judge Winters said when he had finished. That was very brave. I have one more question for you. What would make you feel safe going forward? Thad considered this carefully. I want to live with my mom, he said after a moment. In our new apartment. I want Ren to feel safe again. And I don't want to see Garrison anymore. Ever. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Thank you. You may return to your seat now. As Thad made his way back, He deliberately avoided looking at Garrison. Instead, he focused on his mother, whose face was a mixture of pride and heartbreak, and on Ren, who reached for his hand as soon as he sat down. The court will take a brief recess to review additional evidence that has been submitted, Judge Winters announced. We will reconvene in 30 minutes. The bailiff called for all to rise as the judge exited, then directed everyone to remain in the courthouse during the recess. As people began to mill about, Vivian crossed to her children, enveloping Thad in a fierce hug. I am so proud of you, she whispered against his hair. So incredibly proud. Before Thad could respond, a commotion near the courtroom doors drew their attention. A familiar figure had entered, Waqen Ramirez, carrying what appeared to be a file folder. He spoke briefly with Detective Cortez, who immediately ushered him toward the prosecutor's table. What's he doing here? Thad asked, surprised and relieved to see the gas station owner. I'm not sure, Vivian replied, looking equally puzzled. They didn't have long to wonder. When court resumed 30 minutes later, the prosecutor immediately called Waqen to the stand. Mr. Ramirez, the prosecutor began after preliminary questions establishing Waqen's identity and his role in helping the children. You've submitted new evidence for the court's consideration today. Can you explain what this evidence consists of? Waqen nodded, his expression serious. After my initial statement to police, I was concerned about the safety of these children. My own childhood experiences made me particularly sensitive to signs of abuse. He glanced briefly at Thad, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding. Given Mr. Reed's position and the way he presented himself to the community, I was worried his account might be given more weight than it deserved. Objection, Garrison's attorney interjected. Speculative and prejudicial. Sustained, Judge Winters ruled. Please limit your testimony to the facts, Mr. Ramirez. Waqen nodded. Following the incident, I took it upon myself to install additional security cameras covering my gas station surroundings, including the road that connects it to the dugout. My business is on the most direct route between the two locations. He opened the folder he had brought, removing several printed photographs. On 3 separate occasions after the children were placed in foster care, I observed Mr. Reed's vehicle driving slowly past my gas station, sometimes stopping briefly in the parking lot. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Detective Cortez leaned forward, her expression sharpening. The timestamps and license plate are clearly visible in these images, Waqen continued, passing the photographs to the bailiff, who presented them to the judge. I became concerned this might indicate Mr. Reed was attempting to locate the children, possibly through finding me. I reported this to Detective Cortez yesterday when I noticed the pattern. Judge Winters examined the photographs carefully. These show the defendant's vehicle near your establishment on. She consulted the timestamps. July 28th, August 3rd, and August 7th. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And to your knowledge, did Mr. Reed have any legitimate business at your gas station on those dates? No, Your Honor. He never entered the store. On the second occasion, August 3rd, he remained parked in my lot for approximately 17 minutes before driving away when I emerged to speak with him. Garrison's attorney was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is completely circumstantial. My client may have valid reasons for visiting a public gas station, including purchasing fuel. This evidence proves nothing regarding intent. The judge held up a hand. I'll determine the relevance of this evidence, Counselor. She turned back to Waqen. Was there anything else unusual about these visits, Mr. Ramirez? Yes, Your Honor. Waqen indicated the third photograph. On August 7th, Mr. Reed appeared to be following a vehicle that belongs to the Garcia family, the current foster placement for the children. The Garcias had stopped for gas on their way home from a therapy appointment with Ren. Mr. Reed's car can be seen entering the lot shortly after theirs and departing in the same direction 3 minutes later. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Thad felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Garrison had been looking for them. Even with the restraining order, even with all the legal proceedings, he was still trying to exert control. Judge Winters called for order, then addressed Garrison directly for the first time. "Mr. Reed, would you care to explain these photographs?" Garrison rose smoothly, his expression one of injured innocence. "Your Honor, I frequently travel that route for work. As a pharmaceutical representative, I cover the entire Riverside area. Any resemblance to stalking or surveillance is entirely coincidental and, frankly, offensive to suggest." Judge Winters studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Detective Cortez. "Detective, given this new evidence, what is your professional assessment of the risk to these children if they were to return to a home with Mr. Reed present?" Detective Cortez stood. "In my professional opinion, Your Honor, based on the documented history of psychological abuse, the incident that led to the children's hospitalization, and this potential evidence of stalking behavior despite a restraining order, I believe they would be at significant risk of further harm." The judge nodded, making several notes before looking up to address the courtroom. "I've heard sufficient testimony and reviewed the evidence. I'm prepared to render my decision." The tension in the room was palpable as Judge Winters organized her thoughts. Thad found himself holding his breath, Wren's small hand clutched tightly in his. "In the matter of custody for Thaddeus and Wren Mercer," the judge began, her voice firm and authoritative, "the court finds compelling evidence of an unsafe environment in the household of Garrison Reed. The incident of July 18th, which resulted in both children suffering from life-threatening heat-related illness, represents not merely a lapse in judgment but a pattern of control and psychological abuse that cannot be overlooked." She paused, her gaze sweeping the courtroom before settling on Garrison. "Mr. Reed, your account of events is directly contradicted by multiple pieces of evidence, including security footage, medical assessments, and most importantly, the testimony of a very brave 9-year-old boy who had the courage to tell the truth despite obvious fear of repercussions." Garrison's expression remained neutral, but Thad, who had become expert at reading the subtle signs of his stepfather's anger, noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the nearly imperceptible clench of his jaw. Furthermore, Judge Winters continued, "the new evidence suggesting potential violations of the restraining order is deeply concerning to this court. Detective Cortez, I am directing you to open an investigation into these incidents immediately." "Yes, Your Honor," Detective Cortez replied. The judge turned her attention to Vivian. "Mrs. Mercer, the court recognizes the steps you have taken to create a safe environment for your children, securing independent housing, attending therapy and parenting classes, and cooperating fully with Child Protective Services. These actions demonstrate your commitment to your children's welfare." Relief washed over Vivian's face, her shoulders sagging slightly as tension released. "Therefore," Judge Winters announced, "it is the ruling of this court that full physical and legal custody of Thaddeus and Wren Mercer be granted to their mother, Vivian Mercer, effective immediately. The existing restraining order against Garrison Reed will be extended indefinitely, prohibiting any contact with the children or their mother." A soft cry of relief escaped Vivian. Beside Thad, Rosa squeezed his shoulder gently. Additionally, the judge continued, "This court recommends that criminal charges of child endangerment and neglect be pursued against Mr. Reed by the district attorney's office. Mr. Reed is ordered to continue with court-mandated therapy and parenting classes, regardless of the outcome of criminal proceedings." She addressed the children directly for the final portion of her ruling. "Thaddeus, Wren, you will be returning home with your mother today. A caseworker will conduct weekly home visits for the next 6 months to ensure your continued safety and well-being. You will also continue with your current therapy appointments, which have been showing positive results." Thad felt a wave of emotions so complex and overwhelming that he couldn't speak. They were going home, with Mom, today. After weeks of uncertainty, of wondering if Garrison would somehow manipulate his way back into their lives, the judge had seen through him. "Court is adjourned," Judge Winters concluded, bringing down her gavel with a decisive crack. The courtroom erupted into activity. Garrison's attorney leaned toward him, speaking rapidly in low tones. Detective Cortez conferred with the prosecutor. Mrs. Thompson crouched before Thad and Wren, explaining in simple terms what the judge's decision meant for them. But Thad's attention was fixed on Garrison, who had risen from his seat and was staring directly at him. For a brief moment, the carefully maintained facade slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. A silent promise passed between them: this wasn't over. Then Vivian was there, placing herself physically between her children and her husband, her stance protective and resolute. "Stay away from my children," she said, her voice low but carrying clearly across the space between them. "Forever." Garrison's mask slipped back into place, a pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't the end, Vivian," he replied, his tone conversational, almost friendly. "People make mistakes. Courts make mistakes. These things have a way of working themselves out." Before Vivian could respond, Detective Cortez appeared at Garrison's side, a subtle but unmistakable reminder of authority. "Mr. Reed, I suggest you leave the courtroom now. The restraining order is still in effect, and you're currently in violation of the distance requirement." With a final, lingering look at the family he had nearly destroyed, Garrison turned and walked away, his attorney hurrying to keep pace beside him. Thad released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was only when Wren tugged at his hand that he became aware of how tightly he had been clutching hers. "Are we going home now?" she asked, her small voice carrying a hope that nearly broke his heart. "Yes, sweetie," Vivian answered, crouching down to embrace them both. "We're going home. Our new home, together." The apartment was exactly as Vivian had described, small, with a tiny kitchen and just enough space for their essential belongings. But as Thad stood in the doorway of the bedroom he would share with Wren, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time: a sense of belonging. The bunk beds his mother had mentioned dominated the room, freshly made with space-themed sheets on his top bunk and butterfly-patterned ones for Wren below. His astronomy posters had been carefully tacked to the walls. A small desk stood beneath the window, a second-hand bookshelf beside it already stocked with some of his favorite titles rescued from Garrison's house. Wren darted past him, immediately claiming her space by arranging the stuffed animals Rosa had packed for her on her bed. "Look, Thad, Bunny has his own pillow." Thad smiled, watching his sister's delight. The past 3 weeks in the Garcia home had transformed her, restoring the joyful, curious child who had gone into hiding during their time with Garrison. He hoped, prayed, really, though he wasn't sure who might be listening, that the change would be permanent. Behind him, Vivian approached, carrying the last of their meager belongings from the Garcia's car. Rosa and Miguel had insisted on helping with the move, transporting what little they had from the foster home to the apartment. They had just left, Rosa pressing a container of homemade enchiladas into Vivian's hands with a promise to check in next week, not as a caseworker but as a friend. "What do you think?" his mother asked softly. "I know it's not what you're used to." "It's perfect," Thad replied, meaning it, after Garrison's sprawling, immaculate house where nothing could be touched and silence was enforced. This small, somewhat cluttered space felt like freedom. Vivian's expression softened with relief. "It will take time to get everything we need, but we'll make it work." She hesitated, then added, "I got something for you, a gift." From behind her back, she produced a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "Open it." Curious, Thad unwrapped the package to reveal a carved wooden figure, a small bird with delicate wings and an intricately detailed head. "A wren." "I thought," Vivian began, then cleared her throat. "I thought you might like it, as a reminder." Thad ran his fingers over the smooth wooden surface. "A reminder of what?" "Of how brave you were, of how you saved your sister just like you were named for." "What do you mean?" Thad looked up, confused. Vivian smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I never told you why I named you Thaddeus, did I? It was my grandfather's name. In the family stories, he once carried his little sister through a blizzard when they got separated from a hunting party. Walked for miles in the snow to bring her to safety." She touched the wooden bird gently. "You lived up to your name in ways I never could have imagined, or wanted for you to have to." Thad didn't know what to say. The weight of her words, the acknowledgement of both his actions and the unfairness that they had been necessary, left him speechless. "I won't fail you again," Vivian continued, her voice strengthening. Either of you. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I will. But I promise I will always put you first. Always believe you. Always protect you. That's my job, not yours. She knelt to meet his eyes directly. Do you understand what I'm saying, Thaddeus? You don't have to be the adult anymore. You can just be 9. Something broke loose inside Thad then. A dam of emotion he'd held back for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Without warning, tears filled his eyes and spilled down his cheeks. He didn't fight them, didn't try to be strong or brave or responsible. He simply cried, his shoulders shaking with the release of years of accumulated fear and responsibility. Vivian gathered him against her, holding him as he hadn't allowed himself to be held in a very long time. That's it, she murmured against his hair. Let it out. I've got you now. From across the room, Ren watched with solemn understanding beyond her years. Then, abandoning her stuffed animals, she crossed to where her mother and brother stood and wrapped her small arms around them both. Don't cry, Thad, she said, patting his back. We're safe now. Mommy said so. Thad nodded, unable to speak through his tears but deeply moved by his sister's attempt to comfort him. A reversal of their usual roles that signified, perhaps more than anything else, the beginning of a new chapter. Later that evening, after a dinner of Rose's enchiladas and a bedtime story for Ren, Thad stood at the open window of their new bedroom, the carved wooden wren in his hand. The summer night was warm, the stars obscured by city lights and a layer of urban haze. But he knew they were there, constant and unchanging, just as Miguel had taught him. Below their second-floor apartment, a small creek ran through the property, barely more than a trickle in the summer heat, but still moving, still alive. On impulse, Thad leaned out the window, extended his arm, and released the wooden bird. It fell, caught a current, and began to float downstream, spinning slowly in the gentle flow. He watched until it disappeared around a bend, carried away by the water. Like the burdens he had carried for so long, now finally beginning to wash away. A soft noise behind him made him turn. His mother stood in the doorway, a gentle question in her eyes. Just saying goodbye to something, Thad explained, not sure she would understand. But Vivian nodded, as if she knew exactly what he meant. Ready for bed? Yeah. Thad climbed up to his bunk, settling under the space-themed comforter. It felt strange not having to check on Ren first, not having to be the last one awake, vigilant against potential threats. Good night, my brave one, Vivian whispered, brushing his hair back from his forehead. Sweet dreams. As she turned to leave, Thad found his voice. Mom! She paused. Yes, I'm glad we're home. Vivian's smile in the dim light held all the love and promise he had been searching for. Me too, Thaddeus. Me too. When she had gone, Thad lay awake for a while, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of their new apartment. The hum of the refrigerator, the gentle gurgle of the creek outside, Ren's soft breathing from the bunk below. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt the knot of anxiety in his chest begin to unravel. There would be challenges ahead. He knew this with the peculiar wisdom that had always set him apart from other children his age. Garrison's parting words in the courtroom suggested he hadn't truly given up. Money would be tight. His mother would be stretched thin between work and school. The memories of what they had endured wouldn't disappear overnight. But for now, in this moment, they were together. They were safe. And for the first time in a very long time, Thad allowed himself to fall asleep without keeping one eye open, one ear alert, one part of himself always on guard. For the first time since he could remember, Thaddeus Mercer slept the untroubled sleep of a child.